So thank you everyone for joining us here today, even though it's a really beautiful day. That can also change in a minute. So we are really excited to have Mohammed Elnaiem today, the director of the Decolonial Center, Pluto Educational Trust project focused on anti-colonial and decolonial political education. Mohammed's former column, Black Radicals, ran for 2 years at the JSTOR Daily. His work has been published in various news and political analysis outlets, such as Al Jazeera, New International, A New Internationalist, Jacobin, Africa as a Country, World Politics Review, and more. And in his research he has explored various topics, including blackness, the Sudanese revolution, reparations movements, the history of slavery and imperialism, and the relationship between capitalism, colonialism, and patriarchy. So I can't imagine a more suitable person to talk to us today about the topic of genocide and organized abandonment. Just to say a few words, that organized abandonment, like as many of you know, I guess, it's a concept introduced by Ruth Wilson Gillmore to denote the predominant technology of structural violence that the people that have been become redundant to the needs of capital are subjected to, and it signifies a political order that in which abandonment is not considered a failure or an aberration of governance, but rather a deliberate planning where the sovereign abdicates responsibility for one of the main tenets of the social contract, the will to care. So even though organized abandonment has a murderous dimension, it's often covert. It's like under the cloak of cuts or like crime prevention. And while this mode of violence is still in the world very obvious, we have seen over the last months also the rise of another kind of violence, way more explicit, which we could call a genocidal violence, where this murderous instinct is no longer covert, but rather it doesn't happen through neglect, but rather really often explicitly and proudly sometimes states really turn disposable citizens or subjects to killable subjects. So we are interested here in this transition and how these different modes of violence connect to each other. And of course we will talk about Palestine and Gaza, where we've seen over the last 7 months the genocide of the settler colonial state of Israel being unfolded, being unleashed against Palestinians, but also Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo and Haiti, where we are seeing these counter-revolutionary moments turning into genocides. So hopefully we will uncover the political economic logic where it connects all these different cases, and through that we will probably and hopefully see some glimpses of what could be done, or maybe and how we could organize against that. So before that, would you like to make an announcement or after? Okay, good.
Okay. So how long should I speak for?
So I think you can speak for 30 minutes,
okay.
I'd say. 30 to 40 minutes you can speak, and then we will open the floor to questions and reflections and comments, and we'll take questions also from the audience here and online. So feel free to write your comments and questions, and I will take them when Mohammed finishes. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you everyone for coming. Really do appreciate it. This will not necessarily be an optimistic conversation, so heads up for everyone. But also very much inviting people to challenge some of the perspectives I have, because I'm looking for some optimism. I think to foreground this the background of this conversation is the fact that if you had approached me in 2019, I would have been a much more optimistic person, having been involved in a revolutionary uprising myself in Sudan, and having been part of a moment where revolutionary uprisings were happening all across the world, from Haiti to Colombia to Chile to Lebanon, etc. Of course, now, like many other Sudanese people, and most Sudanese people who you might know yourselves, I'm fortunate in the sense that my immediate family isn't displaced, but my entire extended family is displaced. Some in neighboring countries, some as refugees in other countries, and etc. So of course that obviously paints how I look at the world, and some of the links which I've been thinking about. And so in 2019, I guess I'll start by kind of quote from Walter Benjamin in the Theses on Philosophy of History, where he says something about revolution not necessarily being just like a locomotive of history moving forward, but sometimes a concept of pulling the emergency brake. There has been, especially even up to the point of the United Nations Security Council, a kind of fear of what they call a youth bulge. The youth bulge being vast amounts of youth who, let's put it in a straightforward way, are surplus. And these are the people who have been spearheading revolution. But a lot of the discourses of the United Nations also treats this as a potential synonymous group for violence, etc. And that's also the context in which I speak, because of course lots of these revolutionary struggles were, at the forefront of these revolutionary struggles were youth, who, in 2011 maybe some people were saying these are the future of the world, and now treated as an international security threat. Now, I think this ties into a lot of things that are happening at around the same time, and we'll get into the point on Palestine first. But I think Palestine is a paradigmatic case study, in the sense that if you look at the way in which the economy of the West Bank is organized, for the longest time, we've been dealing with people who have been facing the more overriding logic of settler colonialism, which is a logic of elimination, and it's a logic primarily about the quest for land. But just like in the case in South Africa, the expropriation of land, at least in the initial phase, was to confine the demographic majority, so that there could be a form of labor to actually build the settler colonial project in the first place. And for the longest time, the West Bank played this role. Of course, after the fall of the Soviet Union, as well as with the increased amounts of people who are surplus all across the world, Israel, given the fact that it's also a project of demographic elimination, has also been relying on migrant labor, around 300,000 migrant workers coming in from all over the world. And so now, even the people of the West Bank, although many of them are facing all of the humiliations of racial apartheid, past laws, spending lots of money on agencies to get work in Israel, etc., are nevertheless also becoming surplus. And a common analogy that I've been seeing lots of people talk about, from Naomi Klein to Jeff Halper, etc., is that now Israel's in the business of warehousing surplus populations across the West Bank. The case of Gaza is an entirely different situation. And this is most likely one of the most sophisticated regimes of organized abandonment. And organized abandonment is a concept popularized by Ruth Wilson Gillmore, which talks about the various ways in which, for example, things like mass incarceration, but all sorts of different kinds of violence, are actually ways of containing surplus populations. And often that containment requires organized violence, sophisticated violence, the summoning of the productive forces from all sorts of different spheres, from war regimes to weapons regimes, etc. And I think the most important aspect, and one of the analogies that Ruth Wilson Gillmore draws on, is the ways in which sometimes the same prison may also make use of surplus labor, both in terms of containing it through the prison, but also recruiting from that population people to be the prison wardens, people to be employed by the prison industrial complex. And in that sense then, if you look at the conditions of the vast majority of people in Gaza, I mean, we're saying something like 70 or 80% of people in the more professional fields, law, medicine, etc., were completely unemployed. There is no room for industry, obviously, in Gaza, which means there's no room for a productive economy. And so the economy is entirely reliant on aid. And so, and of course, unlike a kind of Bantustan racial apartheid system of the West Bank economy, the economy in Gaza has been almost a laboratory, especially for weapons. And we've seen the most horrific examples of this, including, for example, the latest story by N972 Mag on AI technology being devised and even given killing capabilities to identify the people who they consider Hamas militants. And I think more generally then, the argument I'm basically making is in all of these cases, whether we're talking about Haiti, Sudan, Gaza, in different ways, they're all the cases of genocide being unleashed when organized abandonment is no longer possible. Organized abandonment requires control. The problem with the capitalist system, which is increasingly becoming characterized by rentier characteristics, which is facing globally, both in the global north and in the global south, deindustrialization and premature deindustrialization, is that many political economists are going so far, I wouldn't go this far, but some are saying, is this even capitalism anymore? And basically, I think it's reasonable to think that lots of the ruling class are paying very close attention to how Gaza is being resolved as a problem of surplus humanity when organized abandonment is no longer possible. And lots of the weapons companies who are facilitating this genocide that's being live streamed right before our very eyes are themselves going to arms shows and showing off the technology that they've been using, including, and recently it became quite controversial when France didn't allow Israel to show up. It became such a big in one of the biggest arms fairs in the world, and Israeli politicians went on Twitter very angry, saying, you should allow us to show off our weapons. Now that is paradigmatic. Why then? Is because Palestine has the examples of both racial capitalism of exploitation, taking racial characteristics in the West Bank, transitioning into a surplus situation. And then you also have the way in which, when organized abandonment is no longer possible, when people break out of their open-air prisons, this is how to deal with that problem. And Gustavo Petro, the president of Colombia, has recently said if we allow what happens to Gaza to continue, well, then that's going to come knocking on our door. But we have already seen the capacities and capabilities of allowing many migrants being killed in the Mediterranean, etc. Now, in another sense then, so how does this connect with, for example, the case in Haiti or in the case in Sudan? Well, I contend that what's going on in both Haiti and Sudan are counter-revolutionary wars. In both cases, in Haiti, for example, in 2016, there was a mass uprising because there was an agreement between the Haitian ruling elite and the Venezuelan elite on the Petrocaribe scandal, where the Haitian elite were given 25 years of not having to pay for oil, and in response they were supposed to spend that on infrastructure. Huge mass protests evolved. The gang right now that's causing the most trouble in Haiti, the G9, strongly associated with the ruling party, and the other gang right now, their former nemesis, who recently, just the last few weeks, were associated with the opposition. And when those protests were happening, actually, there was a really awful massacre in 2018, 2019, I think, 2018, in the Solel town, like a slum. And the main idea was to put down anybody who dared to rise up against the order. And this is familiar to us because the Rapid Support Forces, who are now ravaging Sudan, were also dispatched in the 2013 uprising, the prelude to the 2019 uprising, which led to the overthrow of the regime, or the elite overthrow to Omar al-Bashir, was also used to put down protests and etc. They've always been, in that case, the gangs both in Haiti and the gangs in Sudan, or you want to call them paramilitary groups, junior parties to ruling elites and capitalist elites and the political elites. And basically have been used to, of course, extract resources, but put down working class militancy. And in a sense, right, what they're putting down often are people who have become surplus, right, within conditions of a lack of a productive economy, people who are rising up because they want a new social contract. But in both cases of Haiti and Sudan, now those very militia, it's kind of like that analogy that Marx uses in the Communist Manifesto of when the bourgeoisie conjures demons from the netherworld and is no longer able to contain the spells, them with its spells. This is what is happening in both Haiti and Sudan. And so in that example, and that's another example I'd like to give, of genocide coming right after it is impossible to use organized violence as a regime of organized abandonment, or as a technology of organized abandonment. In the case of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, obviously the situation is, there are parallels, right? Especially with Sudan. So for example, the Rapid Support Forces, just as the M23 are funded by Uganda, funded by Rwanda, other militias are funded by Uganda, and just for the same reasons, which is that they want them to be they want to outsource them for resource extraction, particularly minerals, key minerals. The United Arab Emirates does the same with the Rapid Support Forces. And in all three cases, for example, all of these militias derive a lot of their income from rent, in the same way that, for example, the elite in this country derive their income from rent, but of a different kind. The more you go to the peripheries, the more violent rent extraction becomes, but overall, ruling classes across the world are deriving their income from rent and not productivity, which is only reinforcing the surplus population problem, which I'm talking about. And then in those cases as well, you have a situation where, similar to what Ruth Wilson Gillmore argues, the very mechanisms that are used for organized abandonment become a recruitment tool to absorb surplus populations. Same as what's happening with militias in Haiti, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and in Sudan. But the thing is that what we've seen in Sudan and in Haiti is that the ruling classes have no longer been able to contain those forces which they saw as junior partners in policing surplus populations, and instead they've lost control. It seems still that, to some degree, Rwanda has control over the M23. But for how long? I mean, recently we just heard of the story of the M23 taking over some of the key resource mining towns, which are responsible for coltan, which gives them huge control over the supply chain of coltan, which we have the 3 T's. I can't remember I'm really bad at chemistry, but they're the key minerals that go into our phones and technology. And they've already been using a lot of money. They've already been getting a lot of money from highway taxes. There was a report from 2013 which said that, like, for example, the M23 was getting money from Heineken in amount 118,000 just for making sure that Heineken bottles move. And that's an important thing, right, about the extractive economy. There's a crisis of productivity here in the global north. There's a problem of rentier capitalism proliferating. But nevertheless, there's an addiction for things, and there's a need to make sure the supply chains move. We saw how quickly people got activated to stop the Houthis from taking over the supply chains for ships. But of course they don't mind when big corporations are literally funding, in the sense of, for example, highway taxes, as long as the things move. And they didn't care that the fact that the further you moved on to peripheries, the more this required immense organized violence. And the ruling classes, short-sighted as they are today, unlike they were, for example, during the era of social democracy, are absolutely fine with the fact that, for example, the Rapid Support Forces in 2013 estimated to have about 5,000. Today they're estimated to have about 100,000. Right? That's unsustainable. Because one of the problems with not resolving the deep productivity crisis of capitalism right now, and allowing the surplus population problem to grow, is that you cannot engage in organized abandonment forever. You're not God. Nobody can do that. Eventually, organized abandonment, you will lose control. And what I'm basically saying is that the genocidal violence which we are seeing today is that loss of control. And, of course, the weapons companies and the companies who have their investments, including Cambridge, which has its investments in those companies, will benefit, but to the last one of us. But overall, right now, I mean, if we don't intervene very, very directly in the way that the global economy is organized right now, and we don't resolve the productivity crisis, which at the very least allows for that confrontation between the working class and the ruling class to the point where we can transition into something else. And if we continue to have the system as it is, I'm afraid that we're only going to see more genocides. You know, the famous Gramscian quote, which says that in between the new world and the old world, there are monsters. That new world, that doesn't seem to even be on the horizon for me. This is where my pessimism comes, right? It's not that we are seeing horrific forms of violence in transition to the promised land. It doesn't seem that way to me. And it seems to me that from the UN Security Council to the way in which we're dealing with the global refugee crisis, to the way that we're dealing with our needs for resource extraction, it seems that genocide seems to be the answer. And for me, this is the reason why we're seeing the proliferation of genocide. It seems to me, and I guess I don't really have much more to add to this conversation, so I guess I'd like to open it up to everybody else. That genocide is what happens when organized abandonment is no longer possible. So, thank you.